The emotional state in which an anxious person most often finds himself is, to put it mildly, unsatisfactory. But not everyone understands that anxiety is not just some kind of virtual psychological phenomenon, but it is also a psychophysiological process. This, in turn, means that in addition to the fact that a person experiences the negative emotion of anxiety and psychological discomfort in his body, at this moment there are quite real physiological reactions, such as palpitations. The respiratory rate also increases, sweating may increase, cortisol, stress hormone, and adrenaline are released. And at this point, systems such as the digestive system and reproductive system that are unnecessary at the time of anxiety are suppressed. And for example, if this anxiety is short-term, that is, in the category of normal adaptive anxiety, then our immune system is stimulated. If anxiety is chronic, that is, a person can already be called an anxious person, then the immune system, on the contrary, is suppressed. Also, due to the release of cortisol, the functions of the prefrontal cortex are suppressed. This is the part of our brain that is responsible for rational thinking, emotional self-regulation, and future planning. This whole process, which occurs at the moment of anxiety in the body, is very similar to the reaction you know, which is called hit, run, freeze. That is, all the body's systems are put on full alert in order to hit, run away, or freeze. Evolutionarily, this mechanism is absolutely justified. We have it so that we can survive. But everything would be fine if you and I were zebras, and when we drink water at a watering hole, we would worry that somewhere there is an alligator swimming under the surface of the water and it could eat us. Here, staying alert and constantly worrying is very good because besides the fact that we constantly notice an approaching predator early, we can also instantly jump away and escape, because our body was already in a state of full combat readiness. But you and I are not zebras, and besides the fact that the real world is actually fraught, sometimes it does not, but demonstrates a huge number of dangers, and we have a tendency to experience anxiety as if for nothing. That is, anxious people often have this anxiety in the background and does not leave them, almost never. Therefore, it is typical for a person to worry not only when there is some objective factor, a predator, or for example, there's some important conversation ahead. No, sometimes a person can just worry what the person sitting across from me thinks about me, for example, on the subway. Or here's another common example of bad anxiety. This is when you, for example, have met the perfect partner, but you worry that you're unworthy and the person will definitely leave you because your whole body tells you, no, things can't be that good in the world and there's bound to be some kind of catch. Anxiety is absolutely normal if it lasts for a short time and it is fully justified. Sometimes it even helps to function better in this world. Or, for example, if you are worried about an important job interview, then most likely, provided that you are not neurotic, this anxiety will help you prepare seriously. But things are completely different if you are an anxious person, and for you, anxiety is a permanent story. That is, you are constantly in a state of chronic stress, in fact. Then the anxiety before an important interview, on the contrary, will make you avoid preparation and perhaps even avoid the interview itself. Thus, if you have chronic anxiety, that is, it is with you constantly, and you are in this state of chronic stress, then you are in a kind of chronic survival mode. Your body is constantly on alert. You are always supposedly ready to fight, run away, or freeze. And what are you ready to fight or run away from at this moment? Run away from difficult tasks, to freeze in front of the unknown, and fight, for example, with oneself, engaging in self-eating. That is, yes, in fact, an anxious person spends his accumulated energy on this. But the stress response has one very important property. The body must recover. Well, if the stress reaction is chronic, that is, you experience anxiety almost constantly, you do not have time to recover, hence the complete lack of energy. Here we are talking not only about physical energy, that is, you have a low level of diligence, productivity, there is no strength to move and do something. Here we are also talking about a low level or complete lack of cognitive energy. That is, it is even difficult to think about something. And accordingly, what kind of self-control can we talk about here? And here, attention is a very important point. Most neurotics confuse this condition with laziness. But this is not laziness, it is a manifestation of procrastination. Because by definition, where laziness is, there should be a high level of serotonin. You should be happy and not want to do anything, and at the same time not worry in the end. But it's not that anxious people don't want to do something, they can't because they don't have the energy. Once again, neither physically nor cognitively.
This situation is further aggravated by the presence of perfectionism, which is confirmed by research. There's a direct correlation of a personality trait called organization, which is the same perfectionism, with the level of neuroticism. That is, the higher your perfectionism or organization, the higher the level of neuroticism. It's always about negative emotions and dissatisfaction with life. As a result, we see the following picture. A neurotic in a state of chronic stress gets the following. First, it is the presence of constant psychological discomfort, which inevitably leads to cognitive depression, and along the way, a total decrease in productivity. Only in some cases workaholism may be present, but this is a separate destructive story when a person escapes from anxiety to work when problematic areas of his life are pouring in. And in the case of workaholism, a person does not get results and by definition necessarily gets burnout. That is, workaholism is a destructive story. We'll talk about it separately. And now, attention and important point. One of the common patterns of neurotic behavior is energy conservation. That is, in addition to the fact that there is so little energy, both physical and cognitive, a neurotic person avoids any physical and cognitive activities in order to supposedly conserve energy. Thus, hours, days, weeks, and even months can pass in a state of waiting for the so-called right state. This is the right state, or inspiration or motivation, that a neurotic person needs in order to get off the ground and finally do something productive. This is bad news for any neurotic who constantly encounters this. Unfortunately, such a moment almost never occurs in the real world. And even if it does occur, this moment of motivation is either very short or does not lead to action, because at that moment the person is only enjoying a good state. It is in principle understandable that almost every anxious person is characterized by inaction, unless of course he is a workaholic. But we mentioned this earlier. Therefore, there is statistical evidence that a high level of neuroticism is a negative predictor of success. It stands for as follows: inaction has never made anyone successful. And now, an important point to understand. This is the right state or inspiration that the neurotic expects. It is not something that appears according to the requirements. This state appears as a result of actions, and it happens literally technically inside our body.
That is, we need actions in order to gain energy. And here, an interesting paradox is already noticeable. When you are in a constant quest to conserve energy, because you have so little work due to eternal anxiety and no one has canceled it, and you need to perform some functions, and in order to perform these functions, you need the right state. You need energy. You want feeling good is why most anxious people are in the waiting mode for this very state, in order to get moving, but as we mentioned earlier, technically, this process works exactly the opposite, and this is the paradox. That is, we need actions in order to feel good, not the other way around. But neurotics cannot be blamed here. Why? Because a person is constantly in a state of dissatisfaction with almost everything. My life, my job, my partner, myself, oh my God! And this is really a serious psychological discomfort and along the way a state of chronic stress, which has a very negative effect on the body and the health of the brain in general. And accordingly, the desire for good feelings, for a good state is normal here. And literally, the only thing an anxious person should do here is to change this setting in his head, that you don't have to wait for the right moment to move from a place to an absolutely opposite attitude. If you want to feel good, you need to move on. Do something productive, no matter how you feel right now, and only then will you feel good. And the most interesting point, and you've probably been through it, where does self-respect come from? Wow. It's from these moments when, no matter how bad you feel, you do what you have to do.